Welcome, everyone. We will be getting started very shortly. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to see so much interest in today's transit talk on new approaches to fare enforcement. My name is Katie Wilson. I'm the General Secretary of the Transit Riders Union. I thought my hat would be more visible, but anyway, that's our logo. We are a democratic membership organization of transit riders. We fight for better public transit and lots of other things. And we are happy to be co-hosting today's webinar with the Transportation Choices Coalition. So today we're going to begin with a little poll to find out more about you, our audience. Today's panel is going to be sharing information from Sound Transit and King County Metro, and we want to learn more about our audience members especially from outside this region. In a moment, you'll see a link to a poll asking you to share what fare enforcement looks like in your region, if you'd like to share that. And the information from these polls will help to inform TCC's future policy work, so we appreciate your thoughts. And you can see McKenna has put there in the chat a link to a Padlet. So you can open that up if you're joining from your computer. And to add your thoughts, you can click the plus sign in the bottom right corner and write something fantastic, apparently. Okay, so while people are doing that, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge that while we're gathering today virtually, our panel is joining us from the unceded lands across the US nation. We are calling in from the tribal land of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish. We're dropping a resource in the chat and invite you to follow that link to learn a little bit more about the land that you're on, and welcome to acknowledge it in the chat if you like. Indigenous people are still here, many of whom, like the Duwamish, are still fighting for federal recognition. Mobility for all cannot be achieved without recognizing those that first navigated these spaces. As we work toward building a more accessible world, let us honor the physical spaces we occupy and the Native communities, past, present, and future, who live and thrive here. And I see McKenna just put that link in the chat. Okay, and before we get started with our panelists, I just want to point out a few things about our virtual space. We have enabled captions for this talk, so if you would like to hide or show the subtitles, you can do so using the options at the bottom of your Zoom screen under live transcript. We've also enabled the Q&A feature, so if you'd like to submit questions for the panelists, you can use that. We've disabled the chat, but we have interactive polls that we'll be bringing up for your engagement, and we'll be posting links in the chat for you to share thoughts, experiences, and insights. The whole talk is going to be recorded, and a link will be emailed to you once it is available. Okay, with that, I think we're going to introduce our panelists. So since 2018, King County Metro and Sound Transit have been engaging in community and leadership discussions to develop policies that holistically address fare non-payment and fare affordability, support rider needs and experience, and center racial equity. Both agencies recently adopted new policies on fair enforcement, and today's webinar is an opportunity for audience members to hear directly from Metro and Sound Transit about these changes and how we can build on them to ensure that everyone can use our systems to get where they need to go. Before meeting our panelists, we have a question for you, the audience. We would love to know what equity in fair enforcement looks like to you. We're dropping a link in the chat for you to use to share your thoughts. And for this poll, you do not have to write your name and you can leave the subject line blank. Also, feel free to browse around and put a star on any other comments that you like. And I guess we'll spend just a minute doing that. And then I'll introduce our panelists. Okay, so while you all are continuing to do that, hopefully, I am going to introduce our panelists. So first of all, we have Mitchell Lloyd, who is the Safety, Security, and Fair Enforcement, acronym SAFE, Reform Initiative Lead at King County Metro. Mitchell, you want to say hi? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And then we have Russ Arnold, who is the Chief Passenger Experience and Innovation Officer at Sound Transit. Welcome, Russ. Great. Okay, before we dive into questions, actually, I want to invite our panelists to say just a little bit more about themselves and the perspective that they're bringing to today's discussion. So let's start with Mitchell.
Okay, yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Mitchell. I've been leading this Safe Reform Initiative a little bit over a year, coming up on a year and a half. We are super excited to talk about what we've heard through our over a year of engagement, and then what kind of recommendations and proposals we've landed on with in our co-creation process with community members, with frontline employees that we're sharing with King County Council as we speak around proposals on how we're going to achieve a safer and more welcoming future on Metro Transit.
Great, thank you, Mitchell. And Russ, tell us about yourself.
So I'm Russ Arnold. As was indicated, I'm at Sound Transit. I focus on passenger experience and how to improve it, as well as innovation. And within that, the fair engagement team has landed in my shop as we continue to think about how we evolve it to support all passengers. Just a little bit about me. This is my fourth transit agency. So I started at Lane Transit in Eugene, Oregon. I went to Central Ohio Transit Authority in Columbus, Ohio. And then just before coming to Sound Transit, I was at Samtrans Caltrain in the Bay Area and have worked on similar issues at all three of those other agencies.
Okay, welcome to you both. Okay, we're going to jump into some questions. So let's start with Russ on this one. Can you both give us an overview of how fair enforcement policies have evolved at your agency? Where did you start from with fair enforcement? What reforms have been made along the way? And what changes have been made most recently?
Sure. So initially, so I've been at Sound Transit about 4.5 years. When I got to Sound Transit, our fair enforcement posture was one where we looked at consistency. So how did we consistently deploy kind of the actualization of fair enforcement, and how that worked was that 2 fair enforcement officers came into trains, they went to opposite ends of trains, and then they moved forward to the middle, checking everybody. This was thought to be a way, because of its repetitiveness and very clear direction on how it would be actualized in the train would be an equitable execution of that. We found about 3.5 years ago, while reviewing some data, some other practices that may not have been as equitable as we thought, which caused us to begin to look at ways that we could improve or change or rethink how we did fair enforcement. We started with engaging the public as well as suspending some policies that we had, both that the staff could suspend, and then the board also reinforced the suspension of some policies, why we look to reinvent how to support every passenger engaging with our system so they can continue to use our system. I think I answered all your questions. I'll give it over to Mitchell, and if I haven't, please call me out and ask me to answer something specific.
Okay, well, I have a question for you, Russ, but we'll come back to you after Mitchell. So Mitchell, take it away.
All right, yeah, I'll pick it up from there. Metro, we've evolved as an organization around our approach and posture around fair enforcement policies, really with the understanding that regardless of the amount of programming and the affordable fare options and programming that we do, we understand that there are going to be customers that can't afford a fare regardless of what the fare is, and that penalizing people and putting more burden on paying fees or paying fines just only widens that gap for our customers of being able to afford an affordable fare. So very much our through our engagement, through the Safe Reform Initiative, we're really understanding that we want to move to a place where we are equipping and providing resources and pathways for people to gain the right fare for their circumstance. Whether that's a youth fare, whether that's a Orca Left for low-income programming, or whether that's just a regular fare that people have access to and can get a reloadable Orca card. So really our programming and the community engagement work in the Safe Initiative is really moving us more towards a way that we can program and give people the resources they need, instead of leading with money penalties and that could cause further harm. So, and then just overall in our fair enforcement started just a little bit over a decade ago in the early 2000s. And even since then, there's been a number of different reforms and a number of different efforts to remove fare evasion from the criminal justice system, to implement more pathways to resolve fare citations, whether that's community service, whether that's reloading an Orca card or signing up for an Orca Live program and things of that nature. So, and since the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2022, fare enforcement at King County Metro has been suspended and to this day is still suspended until we get back into this work to really create a new vision of what fair enforcement or some program for fair reviewing to be implemented.
Great, thank you. I think it would probably be helpful for our audience to hear with some more specificity kind of what fair enforcement policy the two agencies started from, and then like specifically what changes have been made along the way. I don't know if you both want to try to do that, or I'm also happy to try from my memory to say what happened, and you can both correct me if I'm incorrect. Okay, it looks like I'm going to do it. So
I can do it for us. I was signaling if Mitchell wanted to go first,
okay.
but I'll give it a shot. So Sound Transit's policy was a one warning policy in a 12-month period. And then after that, it went to a civil citation, which had to be, which was referred to the courts and had to be adjudicated through the courts. It's a $124 fine for that. And I believe when you got to the fifth interaction, our policy stated it could result in suspension from the system, which meant then if you were engaged in the system, writing the system in that time period, it was considered trespassing, which had a much steeper penalty. That's what it was. We did suspend it for a while, and suspension looked like we still engaged with passengers and asked them for proof of payment, but all interactions were deemed as an educational opportunity for passengers and only a warning until just recently, about a month ago, an updated policy was adopted by the board, which does change us to 2 warnings in a 12-month period. And then the third interaction is a resolution opportunity that has multiple pathways internal to resolve. You can take a class, think about it like when you get a speeding ticket, you have to take a defensive driving class or something like that to resolve it. It does have an opportunity to pay a $50 fine to resolve it. That fine can also be put on your ORCA card so that you can continue to use those resources to ride. There's a fourth interaction. The same resolution opportunities happen at the fourth interaction, and there is a $75 fine that can be used to resolve, and it can be applied to an ORCA card again, so you can continue to use that resource. And then the board just accepted a fifth interaction in a 12-month period, then would result to a court referral again. And that's $124. It's a civil infraction like a speeding ticket or a parking violation. And at that point would be resolved in district court. Is that what you're looking for, Katie?
Yes, thank you. I think that level of detail is probably helpful, especially if we've people from other transit agencies who are thinking about making similar reforms. Mitchell, or do you want to try to tell us the story of where Metro started and what specific reforms have been made?
I can try. Russ definitely has a lot more detail than I have. Like I mentioned, fare enforcement at King County Metro has been suspended since March of 2020. And even before that, fare enforcement only occurred on our rapid ride routes, which is a select bus rapid transit routes in the region that we provide service to. And they look similar to what Russ mentioned, where fare enforcement officer would check all fares on a particular coach and provide resources or warnings and other information outside of that. Since fare enforcement started, like I said, there's been a number of different reforms for giving us the latitude to remove all fare evasion resolution processes from the criminal justice system, and that to bring that in-house to for us to provide customers more options around resolving those particular issues when they occur, whether that, like I mentioned, whether that's community service, whether that's just paying the fee of loading a particular amount on ORCA card and such. Even more recently, we've been doing some, even beyond that, there've been other changes around in King County Code to, with respect to youth on board our services, really being able to provide extra resources and extra sort of care to their circumstances that they're experiencing, and not lean into the criminal justice system. So.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mitchell. Yeah, and I'll just say, the Transit Riders Union and Transportation Choices Coalition were both very involved in kind of a first round of reforms at Metro, which, started from a system which was very like what Russ laid out for Sound Transit's earlier system, where there was, I think, one warning and then a $124 court issued fine, and moving towards something which before the pandemic was more warnings and $50 fine that you can resolve in various ways. So a little bit of a similar trajectory there, and as Mitchell said, ongoing work. So let's go on to our second question, and I think both of you have spoken to this a little bit, but you can add to it if you like. What inspired these policy changes? How did they get started, and kind of what are the goals? Mitchell, do you want to start us off on this one?
Sure. I think they go back and tied very neatly into just King County government's overall values around equity and social justice. So within, taking that into account, we were seeing disproportionate outcomes for communities of color, that they face challenges. They face challenges when it came to the way that the system and the process and the programming was implemented. So we identified that, and then we went into done a lot of smaller efforts to help alleviate some of that. Like I mentioned, taking fare evasion away from the court system, doing things particularly for youth, And then over the summer of 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, and with our equity and social justice commitments, leadership, King County leadership, Metro leadership made the determination that a complete reimagining of safety and security on transit is needed. So SAFE initiatives were born, and we delved deep into a co-creation process to highlight what does SAFE mean, what does security mean, what can that look like, how does the different elements, that things that I see, things that I feel, the things that I hear, things that I touch in that environment, how does all of that information affects my perception as an individual, perception of safety. So throughout that process of the SAFE initiative, we had over 8,000 different community members engaged into the process, from surveys to interviews to stakeholder groups, conversations, focus groups, so much. And that really led us on discovering so much more when it came to how our community and customers and frontline employees are defining what is safe for them on board our services, and what's safety, even beyond their environment on board coaches, but not on board coaches, but at transit centers, at stops, et cetera. And we really want to ensure that we can put in policies, test pilots, test changes to our practice and procedures to really take the best of the things that we're hearing, not only locally, but across the country, where our peers are trying different things around the country to really implement. We want to take all that information and really try it out and really build a custom approach and a custom, programming base that really gets to the point of really eliminating those disproportionate outcomes for people that are utilizing our system.
Great, thank you, Mitchell. Russ.
I'm going to do my best not to regurgitate all the good things that Mitchell say, because we're on a very similar path. Our agencies work very closely together. If you aren't aware of the dynamic and structure in the Puget Sound region, Metro actually drives our trains. So we have a lot of overlap. One thing I would say, we are guided by equity as an agency. It's one of our core values in everything we do, both internally and externally. And as I mentioned before, some of the early data that we started to look at in terms of interactions with our previous fare enforcement, I don't know what I'm looking for there, execution, looked like it was inequitable, and we wanted to change that. We felt that it was incumbent upon us to change that and make for an equitable outcome for all our passengers. So, we started with a vision statement to help guide the work. So we recognize, and I think this is key to this work, that it's about a balance. So we started with a vision statement that says a system where everyone taps, where everyone who has fare media can get to where they want to go. And then everyone who needs fare media can get access to it. So that has really guided a lot of this work. We still have, even though I mentioned some changes to our actual fare compliance policy that the board has adopted, this month the board actually has a few more actions to take in terms of how do we increase access, because we feel like there's a balance there, for asking people to use the system. We're asking them to have a card and tap. We recognize that some have limited ability to access that, and we want to make sure that everybody can use the system in the Puget Sound region, even if they can't afford to use the system. We want to get the resources to them to make sure they have a Orca card just like everybody else, and they tap and continue to ride where they need to go. So some of the things we're looking at in terms of how we continue to measure the success of this, we've tried to build that in at the beginning of all this, is we're trying to answer some fundamental questions about, as we change and evolve, to see if that change and evolution is in the direction we want it to be. So is the program equitable and not harming communities? Who are we not reaching, and how can we reach them? Is fare compliance effective? in its current form or its new form that it's taking on. What's the effect of this policy on fair revenue and our long-range financial plan? We want to make sure to balance our responsibilities to the region. And our fair ambassadors, who are kind of a new regime, we don't have fair enforcement anymore, helping create a positive, safe, and passenger-focused experience for our riders. So we've been developing metrics all along the way, and one of the key things we've integrated into our policy is that our board has to review how we're doing against those questions from a metric standpoint quarterly from forever. It's built into the policy now because we know that we're creating something new. And when you create something new, you might not have got it right at the first time. And we don't want anything to linger that isn't supporting passenger success using our system. So we're going to do continuous improvement and continuously look at it with our board to say, this isn't working, this worked really well, and adjust to make sure that, again, we're supporting everybody that needs our services.
Thanks, Russ. And yeah, I just seen a couple of questions in the chat about kind of what is meant by equitable or inequitable. And so I know I'm just supposed to be the moderator here, but I'm going to jump in anyway. And just to give a little bit of specificity to it, in 2019, there was a Seattle Times article that was kind of reporting on some of the Sound Transit statistics from fair enforcement. And so one thing that it said is, here's from the article: while 9% of people who ride light rail and Sound or commuter trains are Black, 22% of riders caught up in the fair enforcement system over the last 4 years were Black, according to rider surveys and enforcement data collected by Sound Transit. For Black riders, the disparity grows as the punishment gets more severe, from warnings to $124 tickets to misdemeanor theft charges. In the last 4 years, about half the riders who faced a misdemeanor charge for failing to pay a fare were Black. So that's the kind of disproportionate outcome that I think, is part of what drove the conversation. And, that statement is not kind of explaining all of the reasons why that outcome, was the case, but that's kind of what we're looking at. And similarly with Metro, the Metros, originally their fair enforcement reform process was kicked off partly by an audit that the King County auditors did of Metro's fair enforcement program on Rapid Ride that found that something like some huge percentage of people who were getting fair enforcement tickets were homeless or housing insecure. And I don't think they did racial data for that, but it was, basically people who are staying at shelters or in transitional housing. And so you can imagine that in both of those cases that I just laid out, a lot of what's going on is that you're looking at people who can't afford to pay, right? And so if what's happening is that you're slapping those people with large fines that they also can't afford to pay, and then potentially, misdemeanor charges and, fines going to debt collection, then you're having these really bad outcomes that aren't actually helping people to get where they need to go and really not helping with, fare collection either. So that's some of what the discussion around equity and inequity has been in the context of this conversation. So let's move on to our next question here. And this is maybe I partly might have answered it, but maybe you'll have some more things to say. How do the adjusted policies intend to address inequities around race and housing status specifically? And why don't we start with Mitchell on this one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm gonna repeat something that our general manager Tara White says all the time, where these challenges, not only race and housing, but so much more that we're seeing in our communities, they're so much bigger and broader issues that are way beyond Metro's scope when it comes to housing, when it comes to substances, when it comes to mental health, even, that we understand that there are professionals in our community that are prepared, that have the expertise, that are properly resourced to really help navigate those spaces and get those community members and customers the support they needed. But we as Metro, our responsibility is growing, where we need to come to the table with our resources, with our expertise to meet these people where they are and to connect them to the proper expertise and resources to get the help they needed. So we are doing things like, establishing partnership with social service providers. We're working across the King County organization with public health and other folks internally to build out programming and pilots and things and efforts that we can try to really help connect people to the resources and the help that they need without bringing law enforcement or bringing, hopefully bringing some of those negative outcomes to the table. So that policy work intern Metro is really centered on the well-being of our customers and our community members and our employees. They're leading with that with love, and really trying to eliminate those barriers and cross those gaps to get them the help, the helps, the warm meal, the warm place to sleep at night, connecting them to the places and the people that can get them resources. At the same time, us being a professional of moving, keeping the system moving, keeping the system on time and usable for everyone else in the community. So it's really about really growing our toolbox of options of how we can come to the table and address these different conditions people are experiencing in our community.
Thanks, Mitchell. Russ, do you want to jump in?
Sure, but Mitchell's a tough act to follow. I would say, we talk a lot about radical empathy, and we understand that a lot of times one of the foundational things to changing where you're at is mobility, right? And I don't just mean that geographically, I mean kind of ladders of opportunity. So, for us, we understand that people need mobility to connect to the things that are going to make their life better. And we want to make sure that when they do connect to us and use mobility to get to where they need to go, we're supportive of that, as well as, individuals that need extra help and we're engaged with them in that moment of mobility, that we can connect them to the services that are going to help them. Mitchell and I actually just met yesterday to talk about some work that we're both doing that really highlight what he was just talking about. How do we get people resources in the moment? How do we, if we have a moment where we're engaging with someone on the train who seems to be not in the best state or needing some extra support, how do we get them that support right then and there? And we're trying to figure that out. How do we connect in other services in the region to support people in that moment, so that it's not caught up from an enforcement or a punishment standpoint, but it's caught up in a service standpoint. How do we serve them? Not just how we serve their mobility need, but if they're utilizing our services in a way that wasn't intended, how do we connect them to services that they can utilize to get the help they need? I think that's what we're all trying to balance. We don't want to engage with somebody who's struggling and make that struggle worse. And we do know that in that moment of face-to-face human interaction, there's a moment to help them. And maybe all those resources don't live in the transit agency, but we can be the catalyst to connect them to the resources they need, or to organize that interception with other agencies in the region that are attempting to do that. So I think that's what we're trying to balance, all of us, and it is really a balancing act.
Okay, thank you. So our next question, non-payment of fare is not in and of itself a rider safety issue, but this conversation is often lumped in with larger upstream social issues like safety and security in the minds of the public, especially in downtown Seattle. There's a public conversation about the quality of experience riders can expect when using transit and a perception that has declined. Can you talk about how you view the distinction between fare policy and security, how agencies are responding to rider feedback, and speak to what agencies are doing to ensure that every rider can count on a high quality experience riding transit? Let's start with Russ on this one.
Sure. I mean, I do think the two get linked, and they don't need to be linked, right? Just because there's a moment, and we know that from our own research over the last 3 years, surveying our riders, focus groups and everything else, one of the highest reasons people don't present with fairs when engaged with a fair enforcement officer or a fair ambassador is they were unsure where to tap. It was confusing. They didn't know where in the system to tap, and they needed to get on the train. Like the second highest reason is they were running behind. They were running late. They felt like they were going to miss the train, which means, missing things down the line, getting to work on time, picking your kid up on time. And they made a choice, right? And there shouldn't be outsized punishment for that choice, and that's what we're trying to figure out. So I don't think that always somebody that does not have fair or is able to present fair is a safety or security issue. That being said, there are safety security issues that I think we're all struggling with and dealing with, and trying to figure out how we can ensure physical and psychological safety for all passengers so that they can at least have the foundation for a great experience is key to what we're attempting to do. But we're making sure that we're being very intentional, at least at Sound Transit, to not say the two are the same. So fair enforcement used to be in our security office. It was deployed by our security team. It is now in our passenger experience office and team. We've changed all of the training to be more customer focused and not as much security focused. That doesn't mean that there isn't a need for security in the system to make sure people are safe. And that is, deployed by our security team, and it's still needed. But I think you begin to institutionalize and head in the wrong direction when you say that they are 100% related, that just having a fair means that you are 100% following the code of conduct and you're not doing anything wrong, and not having a fair means the opposite. I think breaking that foundation is a key to start to think about how you support people differently and how you set expectations differently about using the system. And so, for us, that was a key first step in terms of how we view the work, because they're not the same. And when you look at them the same, I think about, we used to have someone from the fair enforcement team from Metro come and talk to us about the changes they made. And I'll never forget, he would talk about when it was about enforcement, you got done with your shift and you almost compared, like, oh, I caught like 172 people. How many did you catch? Oh, you only caught 160. And it was like this weird competitive thing. And when Metro changed to say it's not about enforcement, it's about helping people, the whole mentality shifted about how they deployed that work. We've seen the same thing with us. So, I think changing that notion that the two are linked and connected to each other is the beginning to start to figure out how you support every passenger that uses your services in the appropriate way.
Thanks, Russ. Mitchell.
I agree with Russ with everything he said, and I think from my point of view, like, safety is such a much broader issue than just fair. Safety, that safety and security really starts the moment you leave your door, and as you're on the way to our facility to access our coaches and access our service to get to the place that you're going. So really much a door-to-door concept. And really, we was fortunate enough to go through this SAFE initiative and hear so much directly from riders for a different intersection of identity, whether it was people of color, whether it was people with on the verge of homelessness, whether it was a frontline employee or an operator who were driving the coaches every single day and seeing the condition of our riders. And we heard so much. The overwhelming theme of all of our conversations was presence. And that is such a big idea, and not just security presence, but presence from all functions and folks within our organization, from people with language skills to translate information, people with route information to ensure people were mapping their routes correctly to get to what places they wanted to go. Whether it was people who work with fairs, how to coach riders on how to get the proper fare and get signed up and utilize the Orca card, which is our fare payment medium here in the Puget Sound region, how do we get more people into the system to show up for our customers, for our employees, even if it's just with a friendly smile. Now, our operators spend 95% of their function along on a coach, driving, maintaining, our transit times, and having people into the system to check on them, to ask them if they need anything, to get them, to allow them to take a break if they need to. Like getting more people and more resources into the system to activate spaces so our customers aren't alone at transit centers. That there's a sense of order to our spaces. There's a sense of management and oversight to our spaces that really brings comfort to our customers. And even beyond that, we heard so much information about how training impacts people's comfortability around safety, how access to information, how knowing the rules knowing the policies and procedures that we as Metro employees work around really impacts customers. People felt very hesitant. Our customers felt very hesitant to call someone if they saw a person of color breaking a rule, behaving in a particular way, because of the conditions of the law enforcement, the microscope that law enforcement has on what potentially can happen. So customers are being put in very strange situations on who to call, and when I call, what may happen. And I don't want to have, and our customers didn't want to have that on their conscience. So having that layer of transparency and information of this is a proper person to call. These are the resources. These are all the people in our system that can help with a variety of different circumstances and conditions that you may experience. Really gets to that comprehensive idea of what security, what safety is, way much beyond just fares.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to be moving into audience questions in just a moment, but I just have one more probably fairly quick question for you both before we do that. And that is, why should other agencies look into similar policy reform? Hopefully an easy one to answer. Mitchell, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll kick us off. I think this is such a huge issue that nobody's really figured out. We haven't figured it out. I know Russ wouldn't say he's figured it all out, and our peers across the country hasn't figured it all out. But we are willing to come to the table with fresh ideas, new ideas to change our approaches to really get the outcomes that we need and that we know our customers and our employees need. So doing the work really not only after this, in this pandemic, welcomes customers back, but creates an environment where they want to come back, where transit maintains a viable option for so many that was traveling on trains and buses and boats and everything around the Puget Sound region pre-COVID. So we really want to, it's more important than ever now that we maintain that safe space to really welcome our customers back with welcoming arms. And there's so much work going on across the country that we're able to stay in contact, that we're able to share our lessons learned. So you can take the good that we're learning and leave the bad and take what you want and really create a custom system that not only meets the expectation of your customers and employees, but really push you in a direction that starts to erase a lot of these dangerous and harmful outcomes that particular communities are seeing.
Okay, thanks, Mitchell. Russ, why should other agencies do this?
I'm listening, I'm thinking about an answer, and there's this weird part of me that's like, what's the right thing to do? And I don't mean to be flippant or anything else or dismissive about the challenges, but when you're talking about supporting people, getting them where they need to go, making sure they get there on time, making sure they can connect to the things that make their life great, it doesn't seem it seems disproportionate to say pay $275, you don't pay $275, go to court and pay $124. It seems like there's a better way to do it. It doesn't mean that we absolve people from their own accountability, but we seem to think that it's either all structural or it's all behavioral. And it feels like it's a little bit of both. It feels like the structure can help if we think about a different way to structure the expectations and how we support people. And it feels like, being clear about what the expectation of others is. I don't know. It just feels like it's like I said, it feels like it's the right time to rethink how these policies work and support people, because that's, at least for me, fundamentally what transit does. It supports people. It supports people getting where they need to go. It supports their choices for how to move about a region. And it doesn't seem supportive. It seems contradictory to that support to be overly punishing to people who need that help when they're in a moment where they have the most need. I don't know. I felt like I used the word need there a whole bunch in a row that make a lot of sense. But it just seems like the other thing I learned when I got in transit like 12 years ago, almost every single thing I got into transit, I would ask kind of why we did something a certain way, and people would explain to me that's the way it's always been done. So, if you haven't looked at that policy in years because you're like, man, we said it years ago, and it's probably maybe just a time to look at it. Doesn't mean it's wrong, doesn't mean it's right, but there's always an opportunity to look at it with fresh eyes and see if there's a better way to do it.
Great. Thank you both so much for all of these insights and information about what your agencies are doing. We have a bunch of questions from the audience. But first we have one more question for the audience. So we're going to be dropping another link in the chat for you all to share your ideas over the next 15 minutes on what further improvements could be made to fair enforcement approaches. So feel free to follow that link when it appears in the chat and share your thoughts there on the Padlet. Cool. Well, without further ado, so that we can get through as many questions as possible, I'm going to jump into audience questions. So we've had a bunch of questions about free or zero fare. In the reform discussions, were there conversations about moving toward either free fare structures on the one hand or proof of payment structures on the other? Are there plans within either agency to move toward one of these systems? Why or why not? One of you want to jump in here?
I'll jump in and take that one. So the conversation about free fare is always a conversation about the impact of what that means, and we did talk about it from the standpoint, at least internally, about what that meant and is that a direction that we could go in. And our firebox recovery rate prior to the pandemic, the policy is set for 40% firebox recovery. And we were approaching that in, I believe, 2017, getting close to 40% recovery. That means that's 40% of the, roughly 40% of the operational cost comes from fares. And, if you just kind of, the simple, impact is if you lose 40% of that revenue, it can affect your ability to either maintain your system or deliver the service that you've indicated. So we did not want to minimize or have any impacts to the service, that we wanted to deliver to the region or that the region needed. So that being the case, we looked for ways and to strengthen our policy to balance support and ensure that we're recovering the fair revenue the board has directed us to. That doesn't mean the board won't engage in other conversations or ask us to do analysis and give them an understanding of the impact, but that's kind of where we were at least in that conversation. We are looking at currently what it would take. We're an open system. What it would take to be more of a closed system. But like I tell everybody, my understanding is, friends at Muni and MTA and MBTA, even closed systems don't have 100% fair compliance. We've actually seen non-fare boardings increase even on our buses from about 3% to about 8%, and every one of those individuals go by an operator. So there's no 100% solution here, but we are trying to look at all possible solutions and then understand what those solutions impact would be to our ability to deliver not just the service that we've committed to this region daily, but also the expansion that the region has asked Sound Transit to deliver.
Hey, thanks, Russ. Mitchell, do you want to add anything to that?
I would add just a little bit. So we already do maintain a proof of payment system. So as you board, coaches or vans, there's an expectation to tap a fare, show a fare, or transfer stuff like that. So that's already the system that we've been maintaining. But beyond that, so the conversation, it's also the free fare conversation is such an interesting conversation. Like Russ said there, along with the financial elements and things of that nature, there's things that are just short of universal free fare that we can do to really maintain and help to keep the most vulnerable in our community, most disadvantaged in our community. Things like income-based fare discounting and fare subsidizing. Things like zero fare for youth. A big portion of our business clients are the big businesses here in downtown Seattle and other parts of the region that provide free transit for that pay for transit for the employees through unlimited passport product. We also have things like Orca Lyft that really targets people at or below 200% of federal poverty rate. So there's already when I mentioned getting people connected to the right fare and the right resources, there's so much already that we're doing to help people afford fare and understanding that everyone can't afford even $1 or even anything. So really pushing it and leading with that empathy and that love, the understanding that the challenges that people are facing, especially as we deal with this global pandemic, that we understand that there's much more that we can do, and fares provide us a little bit of that resource to do that work, to continue doing that work, to continue putting the huge network of routes and really bridging those gaps to opportunities from communities and to recreation, to education, to healthcare, to all the important things that they need to. So while it is a conversation that will continue to evolve, there's so much more just short of that conversation that is also happening as we speak to really help bridge that gap around access.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, access and safety for all are so important. As we talk about fares versus enforcement versus safety versus security, many people have noticed an increase in drug use around and sometimes even on transit. What are transit agencies doing about this to keep transit safe and inviting for all?
I guess I'll tackle that. So we are doing everything we can, so many different things. So, but we recognize that these different conditions that we're seeing on our coaches are symptoms of bigger issues across society that we're dealing with, that we as a transit agency are ill-equipped to cure on our own. That is so important to work with other departments, leadership, with the community to help cure ourselves, so we can start to see an environment that is a lot safer, that's a lot less present with some of these symptoms. Like I said, in our implementation report for the SAFE initiative, we have a roughly 24 different proposals that we are hoping to implement between now and the next several years to really help us try to navigate and provide resources and partnerships to help to address some of those issues. Things like, concepts that we've taken from folks from all over the different country, whether that's, like I said, partnering with social service providers to get social service, mental health, homelessness, care providers on our system to be able to assist people in moments of crisis. And a lot of that work and much more work are really based on trying to interrupt behaviors, interrupting those undesirable activities on our coaches at our transit centers, throughout our system and really introducing opportunities for our customers to get the support that they needed in the moment that they needed, while we have them as a captive audience. So yeah, we're going to be trying pilots. We're going to be doing policy changes. We're going to be changing some of our practices and really creating even new programming to really help us address something, not only smoking, but so much more that we're seeing on board our system.
Hey.
And I'll just, reiterate a lot of that, disrupting that. We're looking at changing the patterns of our, security team and how frequently and where they're at. Are they at the platform? Are they in the cars? We're trying to solve it, but I want to go back to, one of your earlier questions and reiterate, someone we engage with on the train who may be using drugs doesn't mean that person didn't pay to get on the train, right? So that's why the security team is bifurcated from our Fair Ambassador team, because the two, while there may be moments, they aren't intrinsically tied to each other. But I had the innovation department in our agency, and we talk a lot about, kind of failing fast, trying things, seeing what worked, and not sticking to things that aren't working. So just like Mitchell was saying, we're trying a lot of things to see what is working, what isn't working, and we want to make sure that we that we evolve quickly, because we are trying to figure it out, and it does disrupt, drug use on the system. It's a bad passenger experience. It affects operators. It's just something that we want to do our best to ensure that it isn't in our system and is connected up with, the right resources, again, whatever those resources are that are outside of the purview of the transit agency. So it may sound again like we should have the answers. I don't think we do, but I think we're trying to figure it out, and we're trying to figure out, not just internally, but with our communities and with our partners, and figure out what can we do to change unwanted behavior so that we can deliver the most positive passenger experience to every passenger that engages with our system.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're just going to do one more question and then wrap up, since we're coming up on 2 here. So Mitchell, you spoke about working with focus groups to more deeply understand what contributes to their feeling safe. You said that Metro used that feedback to guide policy. What specifically did people tell Metro in those focus groups about their feelings of safety, and how specifically did that feedback change policy? So we're looking for a link between feedback and policy here.
Sure. So like I mentioned, our top theme in our feedback was presence, bringing more presence to the system. And that's beyond security presence. Like I said, that's customer information, language access, that's connection to the right fare, and some activating our transit centers so they can become assets to the local community. So people can feel seen and protected as they navigate the community. That's our second thing was about our code of conduct, making it clear and actionable. Over the past couple of years, lots of different things around law enforcement from the state level has changed around how they do their job and how they show up in different spaces. So that's really thrown a wrench into our code of conduct. And as that bigger and broader conversation around public safety is happening, we want to make sure that transit safety is a part of that conversation. We don't want to silo transit safety from the experience in other places in our community. That we want to try as best as possible to ensure that the experience is consistent, whether it's you're walking on the sidewalk, where you're walking through a park, or you're on a transit coach. That we want to be aligned with our codes and with our code of conduct and our approaches and practices to ensure that those practices or that experience from the customer standpoint is as consistent as possible. And then thirdly, there's so much good work is happening locally and within our organization in the community that we're in a position where we aren't the experts on a lot of this work, that we can utilize our positioning and our resources to really put people and organizations in the place to really exceed, and they lead us, and we become really a team player and really be able to funnel the resources and uplifting them in whatever they do to really accomplish their missions and really help our customers in their work. So that work is directly reflected into our proposals that we're going to be starting with, and SAFE is already reflected in some current policy changes that are around elements that are outside of the SAFE umbrella. So we're taking this co-creation conversation super to heart as we navigate the path forward.
Okay, well, thank you both so much for joining us today. As we wrap up and everyone thank our panelists, we're going to be opening up the chat. So feel free, audience, to leave us any resources, comments, feedback, or future transit talk ideas. And we will be sending out a recording later by email. Ride Transit Month, that is June, is just around the corner. So be on the lookout for more events from TCC like Transit Trivia and Ride Transit Night at the ballpark. And you can stay connected with TCC and the Transit Riders Union on social media, through our newsletters. Thank you all for coming. 2:01, not bad.